A very good evening to everybody today. On live interactions with global change makers, we have Mr. Sougata Nandi, the founder and CEO of 3E Advisory, Energy, Environmental Efficiency Advisory, based out of UAE. He's had more than 2 decades of experience and has worked extensively in climate change. He's also the chairman of Climate Control Awards ME 2020-21. Currently, he has his own startup, 3E Advisory, whose mission is to make every consumer an energy manager. He graduated from IIT Kharagpur and has also completed his master's degree in energy engineering again from IIT Bombay. He's a lead AP certified practitioner and also a PMP in 2008. We would all like to welcome Mr. Sougata Nandi. Welcome,
Thank you
sir.
very much, Asha. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me.
So you've had a sterling career in the spectrum of environment and energy. You graduated in environment engineering from IIT Kharagpur and MTech from IIT Bombay in environmental engineering in the 80s. What was the driving factor then?
Well, I assume that you're asking that why I stuck to the energy management as a career. If that is the question, then the driving factor for that has always been my one-track thinking. That if I have been trained in a certain engineering discipline from the most premier institute, perhaps in the world, then I would be doing good justice to the system and to the government's investment in the human resources of India if I could contribute back in the same engineering discipline. So essentially, this was my one-track thinking, and which perhaps lacked creativity because most of my batchmates are actually not practicing energy engineering. And so that has been the driving force. It has been very challenging to create any kind of stellar career in energy management because the field has its own limitations. So one has to be very creative to figure out how to take it forward. And essentially, it has the most interesting thing that I've found in my career of energy management over the last 25 years is that it has been an ever evolving field since the time I started energy management in India to what I am currently doing in the UAE. And that has actually inspired or motivated me to stick to this field and look for new initiatives all the time. So possibly that and the combination of the training from the most premier institute would be the two factors that you could consider as the driving force behind my career.
Wonderful, sir. So presently you're leading and you founded 3E Advisory. So what is the function of the same?
So
Vision and
yeah. So the to answer your question in a roundabout manner, I think everybody now accepts that climate change is a reality. And even more so the impact of climate change, which is going to be devastating. I think which is already is devastating to a lot of societies, a lot of nations, to a lot of communities. At the heart of all of this is energy efficiency. And the two biggest contributors to climate change or carbon emissions, which is the leading cause of climate change, are basically the transportation sector and the building sector. So my work has predominantly been in the building sector. Transportation sector is something that I've not worked with, but I closely follow that. But I have stayed away from that for obvious reasons because I don't know enough of that sector. So the focus of our work has consistently been energy efficiency. I think energy efficiency or energy conservation trumps everything else. And while we have done energy efficiency or energy conservation through various models, varieties of models like the energy services company, the ESCO model, we have utilized Internet of Things to deliver energy efficiency and so forth for the last 25 years. But I essentially concluded at the end of over the past 25 years that possibly we are getting it all wrong. The predominant fulcrum of energy conservation everywhere has been either technology or funding. we have for some reason overlooked the most uh, cost effective resource as well as the best resource to deliver energy efficiency, and that is the human element of it. And I'll give you simple examples. So while technology can bring a lot of fancy products, most efficient equipment, etc., to a building, but if the operator of the building doesn't understand all of that, and he fancies new equipment as a tool that needs to be preserved, and therefore he keeps running the old inefficient ones just to elongate the lifetime of the new equipment, then it all the concept of IoT and new funding, etc., beats the purpose of energy conservation. So currently, after 25 years of practicing energy management in various models and through various mechanisms, I have now decided to focus to change all of that through our mission to make every consumer an energy manager. And by that, we literally mean every consumer, primarily the blue collar workers and also the non technical people who perhaps constitute 99.99% of the global consumer sector.
So that's very inspiring work that you are doing. You are also chairing the Climate Control Awards. Now, what are you looking for in the winners of this award, and how can people apply for the same?
So, to elaborate a little bit on the Climate Control Middle East Awards, this is essentially organized, owned, and hosted by a publishing house here called Climate Control Middle East. That happens to be globally leading publishing a publication on the HVACR industry, that is the heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and refrigeration industry, headquartered from Dubai. So, Climate Control Middle East magazine started this initiative for this awards in 2011, and I've been fortunate enough to be associated with the award since that time. And while I've chaired the award a couple of times in between, but this year again I was put in that stage of given the responsibility of chairing it. To put it very simply, the award recognizes champions in the HVACR industry who are actively contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals. And that, I think, is the fundamental definition of what the award is trying to look for, what the award recognizes, and what the award is trying to motivate.
Wonderful, sir. And I believe in the coming times there will be many more such champions. So, in your long-standing career of 3 decades, you mentioned certain learning when you were working on Tricolor Initiatives Free Z LLC, which form the pillars of the future career. If I may ask, what were they?
Well, I think, I wish I knew this when I started my career, but at least I'm grateful that I have learned this in my 25 years of work experience. And I think fundamentally there are only three pillars to success to anybody to become a successful professional in their career. And the three pillars are: number one is failure, number two is failure, and number three is even more failure. The more you fail, the more you learn to be successful. And let me explain what I mean by that. So failure essentially builds three things which are the essential ingredients for anyone as an individual or anyone as in a corporation or even a nation to be successful. So failure, and the sooner you get the failures out of your way, the better it is for your career, because then you spare yourself the ignominy of failing later on. But nevertheless, hopefully, as you learn, as you grow through your career, the magnitude of your failures become lesser and lesser. So failure essentially builds three things which are key ingredients for anyone to become successful. Number one is failure gives all of us experience, and by experience I mean the experience to become creative and innovative. So when you fail at doing something, then you learn to be creative and try to figure out and find definitely a different way of doing it, and that's what I mean by experience, and that's what leads to creativity and innovation. The number two characteristic that failure helps develop essentially is resilience. Resilience teaches us never to give up. Not I'm not talking of never to give up in the short term initiatives. For example, there are some things that are some initiatives that could be dead end initiatives designed to failure. So I'm not talking of giving up on that, But I'm talking of resilience teaching us not to give up on the long-term vision that we may have. And everybody, I believe, needs to have a long-term vision of what they want to achieve. And the third important thing failure helps teach us is, or gives us, is wisdom. Wisdom in terms of learning what will not work. And that is the fundamental and most important thing in any career field, what will not work. And wisdom also about what will work and why it works. And essentially, these are the three things: experience, resilience, and wisdom, which are built upon the pillars of failure. So that's what I meant when I wrote that the failures in tricolor initiatives, or the initiatives that I took at that time, became the fundamental foundation for future success.
So that's highly commendable. I'm sure not only us, but also the young executives and the students who would be watching this, they will highly benefit from these learnings. What are the basic steps that a highly polluting company in a mining industries per se should take to adhere to energy efficiency and being environment friendly, or say a MSME in a textile sector? What steps can they take in order to become more energy efficient?
So this is a very interesting question, and the reason I say use the word interesting very deliberately, because when I actually started my career in 1996 with the energy management cell of the Confederation of Indian Industry, based out of Bombay at that time. And in the late 90s or the mid 90s, the energy efficiency in India at that time was hugely focused on manufacturing industries. I don't recollect seeing too many high rise or big buildings which had central air conditioning system at that time. So therefore, I ended up in my brief stint in Bombay. I ended up visiting, I think, doing detailed energy audits of three different types of industries: a steel industry, a paper industry, and a chemical industry. These are all legacy industries. And when I say industries, I'm talking of industries which were already 30, 40. In fact, the chemical industry that I visited in Gujarat, I believe, was already something like 80 or 90 years old. It was pre-independence. So you can imagine the amount of, the level of inefficiency, or the outdated technology that was all being used at that time. So energy efficiency is universal. It applies to any kind of facility. It does not matter whether you're a polluting industry or a sophisticated, artificial intelligence run building. Uh, Unfortunately, there is no generic answer to this, because every facility has its own opportunities, as well as it has its own challenges or restrictions that you can do there. But what I always recommend is that, irrespective of the type of industry or the type of facility that you are, you need to have a long term sustainable development plan. And that plan does not have to be highly ambitious. So even if you don't know what to do, today I believe everybody understands that climate change is a problem. Climate change affects everybody. And also the fact that climate change can be influenced or mitigated by action, through actions of every individual, organization, as well as consumer. So the idea is to start small, start now, have a long term plan. Even if you improve by 5% every year, at the end of 5 years, your improvement will be more than 20%. And that's the key secret to making sustainable development or energy management successful in the long run for any type of organization anywhere in the world.
Wonderful, sir. So that just says us there is a long way to go, but small steps are to be taken to achieve larger vision. So, what is the cost versus benefit analysis of being energy efficient and being environment friendly? Because many a times, even lately, we've observed packaging of certain products being not very environment friendly, and they could incur more cost. But what is the benefit in actuality when we go to see for that?
See, there's a common belief, which is not necessarily accurate 100%, that energy efficiency and environment friendliness are mutually exclusive. That's not necessarily the case. And the energy efficiency has a direct impact on environmental friendliness. The more energy efficient you are, the more environmentally friendly you would be. is a given. And it also works in a vice versa manner as well. And I don't know how old your audiences would be, but I remember when I was studying at IIT Kharagpur, we used to travel regularly by local train from Calcutta to Kharagpur, I think every weekend. And I don't remember seeing any plastic packaging on any of the snacks or the tea that we used to consume in the local train. They used to be made in the train itself, served there in very environmentally friendly packages, which we used to just throw out of the window. We did not even have the awareness. But when I think back, I realized that all of those products were highly environmentally friendly. They did no damage. But in the last 3 decades, I see there is a transition. In the earlier days, the transition was slow and gradual, but then it picked up pace, and advent of plastic water bottles came in, tea being served in the local trains in plastic cups. So all of these things are essentially habits that we have uh, built up, which have caused environmental problems. And if we can keep going back to our original roots, I think the cost benefit is a moot point, and this we demonstrated through the energy or the corporate sustainable development activity that we implemented 15 years back in as a first time corporation in the Middle East. We had enough losses within the system. Once we plugged those losses, that generated enough cash that was again put back into the system to generate further savings and further cash. And all that we were doing at that time was automatically creating a positive impact on the environment. So cost benefit to me is a very moot point. You need to start somewhere and pursue the virtuous cycle of energy conservation that I personally call it, or we call it as a company, which essentially becomes like a perpetual motion machine that once you start will automatically keep expanding by itself.
So that's I hope that many viewers would be listening who have these kind of questions. Now, what should the governments in the emerging countries focus on to curb pollution and control climate change?
Again, there is no generic standard answer for that, because we have to again understand that as we have seen with the discussions and negotiations with the Paris Agreement, the various conference of parties, etc., that every country has its own peculiarities. Every country is in its own stage of the economic maturity. So what applies in the United States will not apply in India, and that's the reality. So trying to set the same goal for everybody is an impossible task. Is essentially a non-starter. So it really depends on which government we are talking of, and even if you take countries like any country, honestly, uh, even the smallest of countries have diverse regions as well. Uh, India is not a small country. India is quite a big country. But if you talk of India, honestly, there is no standard India. You go to the south, the requirements are different, the climate is different, the environment is different, the maturity of the economy is different. If you go to the northeast, completely different story altogether. So there are certain advanced economies where you can put in stringent actions, stringent regulations, but then there are also a little backward economies where you need to have a soft start, but you need to start somewhere. So in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, you can reach the target that where you can start harmonizing everybody. Again, it really depends on what kind of impact that we are trying to achieve, whether it's short-term impact, the quick buck impact, or do we want to have long-term impact? So whenever I'm asked this question, I always ask back that are we looking for short-term benefits? Short-term benefits are easily achieved through just revising your electricity tariff structure itself. If you talk of energy efficiency, you can tweak your environmental impact assessment or the environmental regulations that you need to adhere to get an NOC for a new project or for an existing project expansion for that matter. And you need to, unfortunately, because we live in a world where economy controls everything, we need to attach a economic price for every initiative. So if there's a new factory that is coming up, which is, let's say, in the MSME sector, and they cannot afford to put in the treatment required for the waste that they will generate and pump into the atmosphere or into the drainage system, then they need to pay a separate fee for the government to be able to take care of that treatment. So for all projects, a life cycle cost strategy is mandatory. But what is missing currently in the life cycle costing strategy, and I'm talking very generically, I do not know what exactly is going on in India right now, but what is currently missing that I notice is that the price to be attached to the environmental side of things, that is currently missing. And honestly, if you really want to have a permanent, sustainable change, the least that any government can do is to transform our education system. I am a practicing energy management specialist since 1996, and climate change, green building, sustainable development, all those things were things that I picked up as we went along, like everybody else. But I do not recollect studying any of this either in my school or high school or even at the IITs. So I do not know what is happening to the education system today. But if these things are missing from the curricula, then there's no point in studying physics, chemistry, geography. While they are very important, they need to be studied. But if we do not teach these fundamental things to our students, then we are continuously, we are not plugging the hole in the board that we have. And by fixing the education system, by tweaking it, by upgrading it a little bit, and these things don't require much effort, I think we can solve the problem in the long term as well, and that will become more sustainable a solution.
So very well said, and that gives us enough insights what kind of courses to run. But I may still want to ask. So we are a dedicated institution to working towards building responsible business leaders, and we've been in this space since past 11 years. What are the kind of courses that you see the present workforce requires and the upcoming workforce should be trained upon?
Right. So this is very interesting because this is exactly what we are trying to do in the UAE right now, with a new model for, in fact, the new business model for energy management that we are rolling out to the market. And while our potential projects or potential clients are taken by surprise a little bit because nobody has spoken to them about this model, but once we are seeing initial traction now, and people are getting beginning to get excited with the ideas that we are taking to them. So the challenge with energy management or climate change per se is that climate change has become a very sophisticated term that most people do not understand. Yes, people understand global warming, sea levels rising, but what is causing them, and the connection of climate change to individual action is what is missing today. So while it is important to have the curriculum of the IITs, the IIMs, the doctorates, the research, R&D, etc., those things are must, those things are mandatory. What we immediately need to do is that we need to declutter this whole concept of climate change, make it user friendly, make it so easy for people to understand, the regular aam aadmi, the common person on the street to understand. So if you look at energy efficiency or sustainable development practices in any organization, there'll be a dedicated department or it'll be outsourced to a specialized company. What is missing is that involving every employee or every consumer into this battle against climate change. And those are the kind of I don't know whether course is the right word for that, but definitely awareness sessions in an ongoing manner that is very critical, that can reach out to a mass base, and that can even that should have the power to convert housewives or homemakers to become energy managers in their own right. So when you talk of climate change caused by carbon emissions, caused by energy consumption, the end user, the last mile, which are essentially blue collar workers, the office going people, the homemakers, etc., they are not being made part of this whole journey, and we need to start integrating them. So to make it easy for them to understand, to help them understand what actions of theirs will have what kind of benefit in the fight against climate change, and that is something that needs to be taken care of. So what we do in our energy management model that we are currently implementing is that we actually working with the different departments of an organization, not just the engineering department, but also their HR, their finance, their procurement, and training everybody to become energy managers. And we're not talking of making everybody certified energy managers or those kind of fancy degree courses. We're talking of making people real life energy managers so that they can start helping us in this fighting against climate change. So that's the need of the hour as far as I'm concerned.
So, sir, if we intend to roll out a workshop session on climate change, I'm sure you would be considering us to take a guest session, sir.
We can discuss that separately, I'm sure.
Sure, sir. I would like to thank you on behalf of our entire team and all the candidates who've been present around. Thank you so much for your time, patience, wisdom, and knowledge shared with all of us. Um, we look
Thank you for
forward
having
to
me, Harsha.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.